to be expensive. It also tends to involve very complex negotiations, particularly in countries that have limits on outside ownership of their companies. And as we talked about before, it can be very difficult to merge this overseas market or operation with your local operation. And finally, we get to a new wholly owned subsidiary. This is probably the most complex and the slowest, but it gives us maximum control. And this is where we actually build from the ground up a brand new operation. These are sometimes called greenfield operations because it's as if we went out into a green field and started from scratch. And in this case, because we've built it all ourselves and because we own it ourselves, we have the potential here for extremely high returns. Again, in some countries this is not going to be possible because of legal limitations. But when we can do this and when we have the capital and the time to make it happen, this is probably in most cases the most profitable approach. Now there's a model that tells us something about how product life cycles play out, and I'll talk to you about the traditional model, and I'll tell you why in some cases it's not as accurate today as it used to be. Alright, so this is the way it happens. Typically the firm introduces this innovative new product or service in their domestic market. They're selling in a market they know. They're probably selling to existing customers that they've worked with, so it's a fairly straightforward thing. And they introduce the product and they build it and they have success with it. As demand develops for this product, not just at home, but people overseas become aware of it, would like to have it too, the company begins taking some tentative steps by exporting the product. Remember, this is one of the more expensive ways to do this. However, as we said, exporting is one of the easiest operations to unwind. And so we may tend to export first just because we don't have to go somewhere else and build a factory. We can try out the market using our existing facilities here and send the product overseas. If the product succeeds, if it does well in these overseas markets, then quickly we'll expect to see foreign competitors pop up. When that happens, we are going to be at an immediate price disadvantage. Because after all, we're producing it here and shipping it overseas, and the foreign producer is producing it right where they are. In addition, they probably have established customers there, and rather than having an agent sell the product like we are, they are selling it themselves. And so competition is going to be difficult for us to deal with when we're producing overseas and someone else is producing locally. For that reason, the obvious next step is for us to begin our own production abroad. So this is where we would move production overseas. We would go to the market where we're selling. We'd either buy someone there to produce for us using an acquisition. We might do a joint venture or strategic alliance, or we might do a greenfield and build from scratch. But now we're going to be able to produce and sell in direct price competition with the local producer on the other end. Once this happens, once the product is widespread, being sold in many countries around the world, you will tend to see this where the product gets standardized and production is relocated to low-cost countries such as China. When that happens, everybody is still kind of on the same footing, but they now are producing the product somewhere else and importing it into all of their marketplaces. This is the traditional model. This still takes place with some products, but I would argue that today, many times, this is what happens at the very beginning. If a company is fairly sure of the success of a product, they will go ahead and source it overseas immediately. It's been in the last probably 3 years, 4 years that we began seeing venture out groups in our intro to business classes sourcing products from China. This has become fairly common. And so now this cycle that we used to see has become much, much shorter, and in some cases gets short-circuited entirely. So those are the kinds of things we see happen over the life cycle of a product. As it grows, as it becomes popular, the production can move all over the globe. So I would say a good skill for you to have if you're thinking about how to do this kind of thing, it would be good if I could give you a business situation and some objectives, and you would be able to prescribe the appropriate international entry mode. In other words, if I say to you, I'm building this product, and my goal here is to have maximum control. I have a lot of money to invest, and I'm not overly concerned about how long it takes. You should be able to come back and say, you know, that sounds kind of like a new wholly owned subsidiary to me. Or if I have a product and I say, you know, we already have plenty of manufacturing capacity here, and we'd like to just try out a market overseas, but we're not at all sure we want to stay there, you would probably say, yeah, probably should start with exporting. So those are the kinds of things that you ought to be able to do to figure out where it makes sense to use which of these entry modes. Now, let me just give you a few thoughts to close on here and talk about piracy. Mostly I put this in here just because I really like this pirate flag. But what we're finding is that as products become manufactured more easily around the world, we're finding that piracy is a bigger and bigger problem. And so when we talk about piracy, we typically are talking about products that look exactly like the real thing, but are not. So from time to time, if you're not careful, you may wind up buying products that have been produced outside of license. They've been produced illegally. In some cases, they may have been produced in factories that also make legitimate products. It can be very hard to know exactly what's going on with these products. This is an example of something that's been done to try to stop this. We're just about at the end of DVDs, but when DVDs were first coming onto the market, there was a lot of concern that people might go and buy DVDs in less expensive markets and ship them to higher cost markets. For example, DVDs that sell in Region 5, which is the yellow region, Africa, Russia, and much of Asia, probably tend to sell for less than DVDs which sell in Japan. And so the concern was, we don't want to let people move them from region to region. We want to be able to price in each region as we want to price. And so when you buy a DVD today, it will have a region code built into the disc. It'll tell you on the box. US is region 1, and if you go to Europe, that's region 2. And some of you may have run into this when you did study abroad, when you went to either Europe or you went to South America, which is region 4. Your DVDs from here won't play in the DVD players there. In some cases, people go on trips there and they find very cheap DVDs and they buy them and bring them back, and they won't play here. So their thinking was, we will do this as a way to fight fraud and keep these pirated DVDs from being sold all over the world. So typically now, if you buy a DVD that's been pirated, you'll find out that it does not have a region code on it at all. That way they can make one fake DVD and sell it all over the world. One of the ways that this becomes a real issue is not with DVDs, but with defense equipment. Specifically, the U.S. has a lot of high-tech equipment, and surprisingly, some of our frontline gear, like this F-15 fighter, they use fairly old computer parts in them. They have older computers in them that work just fine, and so rather than replace them, the U.S. just keeps maintaining and updating them. Unfortunately, some of the parts that they use are now getting hard to find, and we're seeing a growing market in fake computer parts. These are old parts. In some cases, they are the same design of parts that were used in things like fax machines, but obviously the parts used in a fax machine are not tested out to do very well in a supersonic jet. And so what we're seeing is people are finding old fax machines and pulling the chips out, relabeling them and selling them back to the Defense Department. They then go into a jet, and who knows what happens. Maybe when the plane tries to take off, a fax comes out the tailpipe. I don't know. So the concern is that fake parts or relabeled old parts, either way, potentially pose a grave risk for U.S. military equipment. That's what we have today for international business and specifically for marketing. I hope that you learned a little bit as you did your stuff before class and as you went through these slides. As I told you, that promise of $50,000 in cash was totally made up. That's the typical kind of thing you expect from a marketing person. You know, they're just always promising you stuff and not delivering. So I hope your semester goes well, and I look forward to seeing you around campus.